Welcome again, everybody. Off the Mic Wrestling Show, kind of an exclusive follow-up to what transpired at NXT Heatwave. Wanted to give this topic I'm going to talk about a little bit more shine rather than jamming it into what I talked about for about 45 minutes on their post-reaction show. Really, what I think is going to be a big storyline moving forward in NXT is just a simple, clear graphic at the end of the show following Ethan Page holding up the NXT title after winning it. And it's Joe Hendry. I believe in Joe Hendry. And like you could sing that song until you're blue in the face. This guy could be in for one of the biggest months anybody's going to have in wrestling because he's in the six-way elimination match at Slammiversary near the end of the month in July for TNA. He could be the TNA World Champion. And by flashing that graphic as the last singular shot that you're going to see on an NXT broadcast, it wasn't Ethan Page being the NXT champion. It was Joe Hendry, a TNA wrestler. Like, think about that for a second. This guy was eliminated out of a battle royal in like 20 seconds. And he's probably one of the most over people in professional wrestling right now. So he could conceivably be challenging for the NXT title, and he could also potentially win the TNA World Heavyweight Championship at some point at the end of this month. And I think there's a realistic possibility that at least one of those is going to happen because Moose, if you pay attention to TNA, has held the title for a while. I think the system with him, Eddie Edwards, Alicia Edwards, and Brian Myers, and now also the former Fandango known as Dirty Dongo, it's a fine stable, but it's like, okay. And I think you've gotten to a point there in TNA where it's like I think it's time for a potential new champion. And if you've got lightning in the bottle with Joe Hendry, you've got to capitalize on it. And then, hey, if Joe Hendry wins the championship, that's a great opportunity for NXT to bring him over. They already did it with Jordan Grace. So, I mean, if you're, this is a really, like, for both companies, this is a potential, like, really big time moment for them to potentially, like WWE working with TNA to potentially, do something really massive. If Joe Hendry is to say win the TNA World Heavyweight title at Slammiversary, and then of course you go down further down the line, it's like, hey, maybe that's a potential match you could have in NXT TV. You could have him go after Ethan Page potentially. Like there's other people that have ties to TNA as well that you could potentially cross over. Like I mentioned on my post show, you obviously have the Rascals potentially reuniting with Wes Lee. Like there's a lot going on with this TNA partnership. Like obviously the Jordan Grace thing at the Royal Rumble, and then obviously her facing Roxanne Perez at Battleground was really the tip of the iceberg of this whole thing. We're just getting started, everybody. Like we're just getting started, and I think this is a huge thing, and it shouldn't be lost on anybody that Joe Hendry was the last thing before everything faded to black. That was the last thing. It wasn't even a sounder or anything. It was just him turning around it like he does in his song before it starts breaking into the chorus. Like this guy's a star, and I mean, I know a lot of people were mad that he got thrown out of the number one contender battle royal right away, but there's clearly a plan here, at least on the NXT side. We'll see what happens with TNA and see if they actually pull the trigger and make Joe Hendry the World Heavyweight Champion, which would be a seismic type move. But it's clear that something's in the works on the NXT side. If you're going to end your big show, your big premium live event with a guy who's not even on your roster. So it's clear that we're not done with whatever's going on with TNA, whatever's going on with Joe Hendry. It's absolutely a big deal. And I'm not trying to take a shot at AEW for how they handled their partnership with TNA, but it wasn't executed very well. Kenny Omega just beat everybody over there. He lost the title to another AEW guy in Christian Cage, who, by some extension, it's like, okay, you have him go back to Impact where he really kind of rose on his own. Like he had obviously the big stuff that he did with Edge and Christian, and also in the Brood, like in his time in WWE. But really, where we started to recognize who Christian Cage was in TNA. And that, like, what we already knew is that he was just being misused in WWE. And so Christian Cage as a babyface beats Kenny Omega on the first Rampage. Cool moment. Due to some shenanigans, then he drops the title a couple months later to Josh Alexander. So, and then that leads to TNA bringing it back into the system. But that was really the end of like that partnership. Like Kenny Omega just went in there and beat all their people up. Like I understand that, like, you know, with Jordan Grace going like getting thrown out of the Royal Rumble, and she had a good showing, but she gets thrown out of the Royal Rumble, doesn't stay in very long. And then obviously losing relatively clean to, I mean, there was a little bit of shenanigans there that led into what's going to be her Slammiversary match against the former Dana Brooke, Ash by Elegance, on that show. So, I mean, still, like, I mean, there's been a couple of NXT standouts that have shown up over there. Tatum Paxley, Izzy Game has shown up over there on the women's side. So this is like a mutual thing. This isn't like, okay, TNA in AEW is just using their top guy to just beat everybody else. And it kind of leads into my problem with the Forbidden Door concept. It's like Tony Khan's just bringing in all these guys, and all of his AEW talents are going over these New Japan people. Like, you look up and down that show last week at Forbidden Door, who I think off the top of my head, Zack Sabre Jr. was the only guy who was not under contract with AEW, I think, that won a match on that show. Everyone else was AEW people. Mercedes Moné won. I mean, okay, actually, you know, I stand corrected. Tetsuya Naito beat Jon Moxley. What was that? It was a stinker of a match. Because Naito is like getting up there in age, but he's their world champion. It's like when you beat all these people, nobody cares. So I'm curious to see how this partnership moves forward with AEW, with TNA talents on NXT, NXT talents going to TNA, how they manage this partnership, see if maybe somebody like a Moose goes over there. Matt and Jeff Hardy are in TNA, although they're not technically under contract. So that's something to explore. There's a lot of former WWE people that are in TNA right now. Dolph Ziggler, aka now known as Nick Nemeth. So there's that element of it. Like there's just a lot going on. And like I said, I don't think it should be lost on people that Joe Hendry was the end of NXT Heatwave, which, like I said in my reaction video, is probably the best premium live event that's been put on by NXT since they shifted away from Black and Gold and went to 2.0 and whatever we're going to call this right now, the new version of the new era of NXT. It ended with a TNA guy. Like, let's not lose sight of that. I think Joe Hendry's going to be fine. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the near future in regards to how he is booked, both in TNA and in NXT. But a lot could potentially happen, and it could be a big-time month for this guy from Scotland to potentially take the next step in his career, because it's clear that this guy has got something, because the people are into him, the people are singing his song. It's made it up the charts on Spotify and all around the world. Like, he is universally getting recognized, and clearly the fact that NXT is seeing enough in him to make him be the closing shot of one of their biggest shows of this year, that's got to tell you something. So we'll see where everything goes. I'll be back more, maybe with potential reaction to Raw. It's going to be a big show tomorrow night. And like I said, AEW, you got two Owen Cup final matches. Like, it's going to be a big week in wrestling here as we move to the middle of July. So thanks for tuning in on this exclusive as I talked about just, like I said, what could be a big month for Joe Hendry. I believe in Joe Hendry. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.